watching. The discovery answered the question of whether the instructions exist. Each living soul now has to answer the question of whether it will use them. The teaching so far has been largely about thresholds, about what waits at the moment of death and how to navigate it, about the structure of the system and the sequence of the exit protocol, about the texts that preserve the map and the history of their suppression and recovery. All of that is necessary. None of it is sufficient. Because the contract was not signed at the beginning of the last life, for that life only, the contract is active now. It is running in this life, in this body, in the pattern of your days. And a soul that learns everything about the death threshold and does nothing about the living execution of its current terms arrives at the gates having studied the map, but having done none of the work that the map was always pointing toward. This is where the teaching becomes personal in a way that the cosmological framework sometimes obscures. The Gnostic understanding of the soul's situation is not only an account of what happens at death, it is an account of what is happening right now. The contract you signed before this birth, signed in a depleted state, surrounded by welcoming presences, presented as the planning of your own beautiful curriculum of growth. That contract has clauses, specific terms, and those terms are executing in your life, whether you are aware of them or not. You know the feeling. You do not need a cosmological framework to recognize it. There are patterns in your life that do not respond to ordinary effort in the way other things do. Preferences that feel less like choices and more like facts. Relationships you seem to reconstruct with different people, as though following a script that was written before you arrived. The dynamic you swore after the last time you would never repeat, which you are currently, with some variation of cast and setting, in the middle of repeating. The self-sabotage that arrives with a precision that is almost mechanical, at the exact point where something genuinely good becomes available. The fear whose intensity bears no proportion to anything in this life's actual history. The longing that has no object you can name in this life and yet will not settle. These are the signatures. A genuine personal preference or tendency is flexible. It bends under examination. It explains itself through your history, your relationships, your choices. It changes as you change, because it is yours and you evolve. A contract clause does not. A contract clause has a quality of compulsion that resists explanation and resists change in a way that feels qualitatively different from an ordinary psychological pattern. The resistance is not the resistance of a habit or a wound. It is the resistance of something installed at a level deeper than your psychology, at the level of the terms you agreed to before you had a psychology to resist with. The distinction matters practically. Because a psychological pattern responds slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely to psychological work, to therapy, to reflection, to honest attention paid over time. And some of what you have been working on in those ways is indeed psychological and does respond. But some of it does not respond, and the things that do not respond are worth looking at differently, not as failures of the therapeutic project or evidence of deeper psychological damage, but as possible contract terms whose authority does not originate in your psychology and cannot therefore be dissolved purely by psychological means. The method for addressing a clause is not the same as the method for addressing a wound. A wound heals through being seen and witnessed and worked through. A clause is revoked through a specific act of withdrawal of consent. The soul that agreed to the clause, agreed under conditions that fundamentally invalidate the agreement, depleted, deceived, surrounded by manufactured welcoming, with no memory of prior contracts and no awareness that it was in a processing station rather than a genuine planning session. That agreement, made under those conditions, does not have the standing of a free and informed consent, and an agreement that lacks free and informed consent can be revoked by the party who was deceived. The revocation is not a ceremony or a magic formula. It is a real act of will, performed by an aware soul. You name the clause exactly, not abstractly, not my patterns of self-sabotage. The specific behavior, the specific compulsion, the specific relationship dynamic that has the signature of a term rather than a tendency. You state plainly and without drama that this was agreed to by a soul that could not meaningfully refuse, that you are now an awake and incarnate soul that can see the clause for what it is, and that you do not authorize its continued execution. You withdraw your consent from it. And then, this is the part that requires the most of you, you stop building your identity around it. Stop explaining yourself through it. Stop treating its outputs as revelations of who you fundamentally are, because a clause sustained by your belief that it is you is a clause that has recruited your own self-concept as a supporting structure. The belief that this compulsion is simply your nature is itself a term of the contract. The clause and the belief that you are the clause are a self-reinforcing system. Withdrawing from one means withdrawing from both. This work is slow. It will not resolve in a week or a month. It does not resolve in a single dramatic insight, satisfying as that would be. It resolves through the slow accumulation of a different kind of attention, one that looks at the compulsive pattern and says not, this is what I am, but this is what was installed. And that, over time, over months and years of returning to the revocation, begins to withdraw the energy that the clause feeds on. A clause starved of your identification with it does not vanish overnight, but it does loosen, it does lose its compulsive quality. And the soul that arrives at the death threshold, having loosened even several major clauses through this work, arrives carrying that much less for the gates to grip. The Gospel of Mary is not the easiest of the Nag Hammadi texts to read. It is fragmentary. Significant portions of the original are missing, including the first several pages, and what survives has the quality of a teaching interrupted, a conversation caught midstream. What we have is a record of the soul's ascent through the powers that try to hold it, narrated as a vision that Mary Magdalene received and shared with the other disciples after the resurrection. And within that account, embedded in the exchange between the ascending soul and the powers that challenge it, is something that functions as a complete diagnostic of the soul's captivity. 4 powers, 4 things that chain a soul to the lower world. 4 leverages the system uses to stop an ascending soul and hold it in place. And the list is precise in a way that decades of reading about psychology and spiritual development has not improved on. Because whoever composed this text had clearly looked at the actual mechanism of captivity with unusual clarity and had described what they saw in terms that remain exact nearly 2,000 years later. The first is darkness. Not moral darkness, not evil in the ethical sense, but unknowing. The state of not knowing what you are, where you came from, what this world actually is, or what is happening to you at death. Darkness is the foundational chain, because without it, none of the other 3 would be possible. A soul that knew with clarity what the tunnel was would not be drawn into it by longing. A soul that knew what the life review was doing would not be bound by its incompletions. A soul that knew what the welcoming beings were would test them and not follow them. Darkness is what makes every other station of the machine work. The entire recycling system is a darkness-dependent apparatus. It runs on the soul's ignorance of its own situation, which is why its first and most fundamental intervention into each soul's incarnation is the erasure of memory. Because a soul that remembered would not be dark in this sense. The forgetting and the darkness are the same thing in different words. The forgetting produces the darkness, and the darkness makes the system viable. Every piece of genuine knowledge about the system's structure, every understanding of what actually happens at death, every recovered fragment of the map, these are all direct attacks on the first chain. The darkness weakens every time you learn something true about your actual situation. This is why the suppression of texts like these was never merely an institutional preference. It was a structural necessity for the continuation of the recycling system. A well-lit prison is a prison in a state of crisis. The second chain the Gospel of Mary names is desire, craving, the appetite that fastens consciousness to the world of objects and sensations and keeps the soul oriented downward rather than upward. Not all desire. The Gnostic teachers were not ascetics in the crude sense, not people who thought the body was simply evil and pleasure simply wrong. The chain is not pleasure itself, but the attachment to pleasure, the structure of wanting that makes the soul dependent on the continued supply of what it wants. A soul gripped by craving cannot leave easily because leaving means leaving the supply. The tunnel's warmth works on craving. The longing for the beloved dead works on craving. The life review's re-immersion in the unfinished business of the last life works on craving. Every lure in the system's repertoire has craving as its point of application. A soul that has genuinely loosened its craving, not performed detachment as a spiritual aesthetic, but actually dissolved, the compulsive structure of wanting gives the system's lures far less to work with. This is why genuine non-attachment is not a lifestyle choice but a structural preparation for the threshold. You are not detaching from things because things are bad. You are detaching from the wanting structure that gives every gate its grip. The third chain is what the text calls ignorance, and here the distinction from the first chain matters. Darkness is the absence of information about the external situation. Ignorance in this specific sense is the soul's forgetting of its own nature, its failure to know what it itself is, not what it is in the world. That kind of self-knowledge is what therapy addresses, and what the life review claims to illuminate. But what it is underneath all of that, what it is in its actual origin, its actual constitution, its actual relationship to the fullness it came from. A soul that does not know this cannot name itself truthfully at the gates, cannot speak the declaration of origin with the authority that comes from genuine recognition rather than learned formula. The ignorance of your own nature is the specific failure that hands every gate officer a handle, because if you do not know what you are, you will implicitly agree with whatever account of you the gate presents, and the gate will present you as exactly the kind of soul it has authority over. Knowing what you actually are is not narcissism or spiritual pride. It is the single most protective piece of knowledge you can carry to the threshold. The fourth chain is the most primal and the most honest to name. It is fear, the fear of death itself. The terror of annihilation, of the self simply stopping, of there being nothing. This fear is the deepest lever the system operates, because it is the one that makes a soul grasp at any offered continuation, any tunnel, any comforting presence, any contract, any promise of another life, another chance, another round. The soul that is genuinely afraid of simply ceasing will take whatever the system offers, because the system's offers all share one feature. They are continuation. They are the promise that the self will go on. And a soul desperate for continuation does not ask what price the continuation carries. The death fear is the final and most fundamental hook, which means that resolving it, not suppressing it, not bypassing it with reassuring beliefs, but actually sitting with the reality of impermanence until the terror transforms into something quieter and more sovereign, is the final and most fundamental piece of the living preparation. A soul that is genuinely at peace with the possibility of its own ending is a soul the system cannot buy with the promise of another round. It no longer needs what the machine is selling. And a soul that does not need what the machine is selling is a soul the machine has very little left to work with. So let us arrive at the thing the entire architecture of this teaching has been building toward. Not the cosmology, not the history of the texts, not the diagnosis of the four powers, or the map of the stages, or even the 10-step sequence itself. All of that is the scaffolding. This is the structure it was holding up, the declaration, the specific spoken act that functions as the soul's credentials at the threshold, the statement of true origin that, when made by a soul that has spent a lifetime learning to know it as fact, rather than as hopeful metaphor, strips every gate of its leverage and announces a jurisdiction the lower order has no authority over. Before its words, understand its nature. Because if you misunderstand what the declaration is, you will say it like a prayer, which is not what it is. A prayer is a petition addressed upward to a power you are asking something of. The declaration is not that. It is a statement of fact addressed horizontally to a power that is trying to detain you. It does not ask. It does not appeal. It informs. It is the soul at the border, presenting credentials that prove it does not belong to the territory whose officials are demanding it stop. The difference matters in practice. A soul that says these words as a prayer is implicitly confessing that it is not sure whether they are true and is hoping something will respond favorably to the request. That posture gives the gate officer exactly the opening it needs. Uncertainty is a handle. A soul that says these words as a statement of verified fact, because it has spent years establishing that the facts are exactly as stated, gives the gate officer nothing to grab. The declaration works because of what it is made of, which is recognition, not belief. Recognition. This is the text the practice points toward every night. Speak it now the way you will eventually need to say it at the threshold, not fast. Not as a recitation. One sentence at a time, with the weight of each one fully behind it. I am not a product of this world. I was sent into it. I passed through it. I was never defined by it. I am not the name I carried in the life that just ended. I am not the body it lived in, the fears it accumulated, the attachments it built, or the contracts it was deceived into signing. These are the clothes of the crossing. They are not what I am. I am a fragment of original light from the fullness that existed before this lower order was constructed. My origin is not here. My authority does not come from here. My destination is not determined by anything that lives here. To every power that stands at a gate and attempts to claim me on the basis of what I carried in my last incarnation, I name you for what you are. You govern darkness, craving, unknowing, and the fear of death. I have spent my living years dissolving each of those in myself. You are reaching for handles that are no longer there. I do not carry what you feed on. I do not consent to your authority over what I am. I am returning to the fullness from which I was emanated, not ascending to it for the first time as a reward I am hoping I have earned. Returning, because I came from there, and I know I came from there, and that knowledge is the only document this crossing requires. I do not consent to further incarnation. I do not consent to the review that would rebind me to what I have left. I do not consent to the beings wearing familiar faces who would escort me toward a planning session I have already refused. The contract that was signed before my last birth was signed by a depleted and deceived soul who could not have meaningfully refused. That soul's signature does not bind the soul that stands here now, awake, seeing the machine for what it is, and formally withdrawing consent from every term of that agreement. I am going home, not to the tunnel's manufactured light, not to the Archons' counterfeit fullness, to the actual source, to the real Pleroma. To the origin I have spent this lifetime remembering, piece by piece, in the dark. Nothing in this lower order has the authority to stop me, and I know that. And knowing it, I walk through. That is the declaration. Those are not magic syllables. There is nothing in the sound of those words that mechanically compels a gate to open. What opens the gate is the soul behind the words, having made each sentence true of itself across a living lifetime. The declaration is only as powerful as the recognition it is made of. Which is why everything that came before it in this account, every piece of the living preparation, every dissolved craving, every faced fear, every revoked clause, was not preliminary to the declaration. It was the declaration being built, one verified truth at a time. Here is the part the system counts on most. Not the tunnel, not the life review, not even the contract. Those are mechanisms. And mechanisms can in principle be mapped and resisted once someone has drawn the map. What the system counts on most is something that cannot be mapped away, something that operates not at the threshold of death, but in the 10,000 ordinary moments of a living day. It counts on the fact that almost no one will take this seriously enough to actually do the work, not because people are weak or foolish, because the system's most durable defense is not any stage of the death process. It is the texture of incarnate life itself, which is so full, so demanding, so immediate, so beautiful in places and so painful in others, that the project of preparing for a threshold that may be decades away perpetually loses the competition for attention. There is always something more urgent. There is always a reason to start tomorrow, and tomorrow, across a lifetime, is where the preparation goes to disappear. Understand what that means, structurally. A soul that learns the map at age 40 and thinks about it occasionally and means to do the daily practice, but generally does not, and dies at 80, with a vague intellectual familiarity with the 10 steps, is in almost exactly the same position at the threshold as a soul that never heard any of this, because the threshold does not test your intellectual familiarity, it tests your reflex. And reflex is built from thousands of repetitions, not from occasional consideration of a concept you found compelling. This is not a condemnation of anyone who has gotten this far in this account, and is now feeling the familiar sinking sense that they are about to understand something important and then fail to do it. That sinking sense is itself useful information. It is the system's most human-facing feature, which is not a guard or a gate officer, but simply the weight of a life that keeps pulling attention back into itself and away from the one preparation that would make the life's ending mean something it currently cannot. The Gnostics who wrote the threshold texts knew this. They did not write those texts as casual reading. The first apocalypse of James is structured as a direct instruction delivered to a specific person who is explicitly going to need it soon. The urgency in it is not rhetorical, it is practical. James is being taught because James will die, and the teaching has to be embedded deeply enough to function under conditions that will dissolve every casual familiarity he has ever acquired. What is true of James is true of every soul that encounters this material. The encounter is not the preparation. The encounter is the beginning of the preparation, if the soul chooses to treat it that way. Most do not. They find the ideas compelling, return to their lives, and the compellingness fades the way all compelling ideas fade when they are not fed by practice. So the honest accounting of who escapes the machine, based on everything the texts describe, is very few, not because the exit is sealed. The exit is mapped, described, preserved across multiple primary sources, and rehearsable by anyone alive. But because the exit requires a quality of sustained seriousness that the architecture of incarnate life is specifically arranged to prevent, every distraction is not malicious. Let that be clear. The beauty of the world is real. The love of other people is real. The pleasure of being in a body is real, and none of it is to be refused or denied. The system does not primarily use suffering to keep souls from preparing. It uses fullness. It uses the genuine richness of a living day, which is so absorbing that the soul inside it cannot hold simultaneously. The knowledge that the day is also a temporary staging ground for a threshold that will require everything the soul has managed to build in itself before it arrives. Both things are true at once, and the soul that can hold both simultaneously, that can live fully and love genuinely and be completely present in its own life, while also maintaining beneath everything the long, slow work of preparation, that soul is doing something genuinely rare and genuinely difficult, not heroic in a dramatic sense. Heroic in the quietest and most continuous sense, which is showing up for a practice that yields no immediate visible reward, and trusting that the accumulation is doing in the dark exactly what it is meant to do. The system counts on you finding the practice too quiet, too unglamorous, too slow, too uncertain in its results to sustain. Prove it wrong not by extraordinary effort but by ordinary consistency. The nightly declaration, spoken imperfectly in a tired voice, is worth more to the threshold than the most vivid and moving encounter with these ideas that was never followed up on. Begin, miss a night. Begin again, miss a week. Begin again. The preparation is not ruined by interruption. It is built by the sum of all the beginnings, however small, however imperfect, accumulated over however many years remain. Everything this account has described about the death threshold, the tunnel, the life review, the beings, the contract, the gates, all of it points back to the same location. Not the moment of death, now. This body, this life, this particular stretch of incarnate existence that you are in right now as you hear this. Because the work that determines what happens at the threshold is not done at the threshold. It is done here, in the weeks and months and years between this moment and whenever that threshold arrives. The threshold is the test, the life is the preparation. And the preparation has a specific curriculum, derived directly from the Gospel of Mary's diagnosis of the four powers that the ascending soul must confront: darkness, desire, ignorance of true nature, and death fear. These are not abstract spiritual challenges. They are practical descriptions of exactly what the gates will use to hold you, which means they are also an exact list of what you must work on now while you have agency. Start with darkness, unknowing, the soul's blindness to the situation it is actually in. You have been working on this for the entire duration of this account. The map itself is the antidote to darkness. A soul that understands the architecture of the system, that knows the tunnel is a lure, and the life review is a bonding mechanism, and the beings of light are not necessarily what they appear to be, and the contract is not a free choice. That soul has replaced a critical piece of its blindness with clear sight. That is not small. That is the foundational work without which none of the other preparation makes any sense. But it must be maintained. Knowledge that is not regularly returned to grows opaque. Revisit the map. Read the Apocryphon of John. Read the first Apocalypse of James. Read the Gospel of Mary, not as intellectual exercise, but as maintenance of the visibility that the threshold will require. Then, desire, craving, the appetite that fastens the soul to the world of objects and experiences and other people in the specific way that makes the tunnel's warmth feel irresistible and the lost beloved's face impossible to refuse. Desire is not to be destroyed. That is not the instruction, and never was. The instruction is to hold desire without being held by it, to love without that love becoming the specific kind of desperate clinging that the machine can use as a cord. The practice is noticing the difference between genuine love, which is generous and releasing, and the grasping variety that cannot imagine the beloved's absence without terror. The grasping variety is the one the system cultivates. The releasing variety is the one that survives the threshold intact. Every relationship examined from this angle becomes a small piece of exit work. Not because relationships are obstacles, but because the quality of your attachment within them is either a chain or it is not. Love the people in your life completely, and simultaneously practice, very quietly, releasing your grip on the specific outcome that your fear of loss keeps reaching for. Then the ignorance of true nature. This is the deeper layer of the darkness. Not the absence of information about the system, but the soul's failure to know what it itself is. The Gnostic answer to the question of what you are has been established across the previous accounts on this channel, the videos on the Pleroma, the monad, the demiurge, the full cosmological architecture. If you have not watched those, this is the moment to do so, because the declaration at the threshold cannot be made with genuine conviction by a soul that only vaguely understands what it is declaring. A soul that states, "I am a fragment of original light from the fullness" as a hopeful belief, is in a fundamentally different position from a soul that states it as a verified fact because it has understood the cosmology deeply, enough to know that the claim is structurally true. Knowing what you are is not arrogance. It is the specific antidote to the ignorance that every gate officer is banking on. The gate can hold a soul that does not know what it is. It cannot hold a soul that knows with the precision of long study exactly what it is and where it came from, and why no officer of the lower order has any legitimate authority over it. And then, the clauses. The specific contracted patterns running through your current life. The relationship dynamic you reconstruct with different people. The self-limiting pattern that arrives reliably at the threshold of expansion. The compulsion that does not bend to ordinary effort, because ordinary effort assumes the pattern is yours and it is not. Go looking for these with the specific signature they carry. A genuine personal trait is flexible, contextual, responsive to growth. A contracted clause is rigid, compulsive, impervious to reason, and has a quality of being done through you rather than by you. Find one. Name it plainly, without drama. Withdraw your consent from it in the specific language of a soul that understands what it is doing. The soul that agreed to this was not in a position to refuse. The soul that sees it now does not authorize its continuation. Then stop feeding it. Stop building your identity around it. Repeat the withdrawal regularly. Over months, watch the grip loosen. This is the work. It is slow. It is unsexy. It yields no visible certificate of completion. It is also the only preparation that will actually matter when the threshold opens and the tunnel's light begins its pull. There is a comment that arrived under the video on the Pleroma from a viewer who wrote, "Since I was a child, I knew something was off. That the way other people seemed to think and live their lives was just wrong. I came to terms with being different." I have read that comment more times than I expected to, because it names exactly the experience that every piece of this teaching is ultimately about. Not the cosmology, not the texts, not the 10-step protocol, but that feeling, the low-frequency wrongness, the sense of a world that does not quite fit. The private certainty that something about the standard story is missing. That feeling is not pathology. In the Gnostic framework, it is orientation. It is the pneumatic spark recognizing, at the level below articulation, that the territory it is moving through is not its origin. And the question that this entire account has been building toward is what you do with that recognition once you have it. Once it is no longer a nameless unease, but a mapped and sourced and precisely described understanding of the system you are inside. Here is what I believe, and I want to be precise about the fact that this is my reading of the material, rather than a claim extracted from a primary source. The texts describe an exit. They describe it in enough procedural detail that it is not metaphor, but they also describe, in the Gospel of Mary's list of powers, and in the first apocalypse of James's emphasis on preparation, that the exit is available in proportion to the preparation. The door is not locked from the outside. It is not sealed against you by a force that exceeds your own. The thing keeping most souls inside the machine is not the machine's strength. It is the soul's unpreparedness at the specific moment when preparation is the only thing that matters. What that means for you, right now, is something that has no precedent in most of the traditions you may have encountered before this. Most traditions offer salvation as something given, a grace extended from above, an earned reward, a state achieved through surrender to an authority. The Gnostic account offers something structurally different. Not salvation, recognition. The soul does not need to be saved by something outside itself. It needs to remember clearly enough what it is that the machine's tools lose their purchase on it. The power is already in the soul. It came in with the soul from the fullness. The entire system's operation is premised on the soul not knowing that the power is there. This is the single most important thing to hold from everything in this account. The machine is not more powerful than what you are made of. The machine is more practiced at using your own nature against you than you currently are at recognizing and refusing its moves. That asymmetry is correctable. It is correctable through exactly the work this account has described. And that means the distance between a soul that gets processed indefinitely and a soul that walks out of the system is not a distance of spiritual hierarchy or cosmic election. It is a distance of preparation, of accumulated recognition, of nightly practice and honest self-examination, and the slow dissolution of every clause and craving and darkness that the gates will reach for. The people who wrote the first apocalypse of James and the Gospel of Mary in the 1st and 2nd centuries made a decision that deserves to be named clearly. They were operating in a world where possession of Gnostic texts was punishable by death. Where the institutional power of early Orthodox Christianity was actively hunting, burning, and erasing exactly the material they were preserving, they wrote anyway. They preserved the threshold instructions and the map of the powers and the ascent sequence because they had decided, at real personal cost, that the rest of humanity deserved to have the map. You are the rest of humanity they were writing for, not as a compliment, as a fact. Across the entire channel, the video on the monad, the account of the demiurge, the full story of the Pleroma, everything that has built the cosmological foundation, this teaching rests on every piece of this, has been aimed at the same thing. Giving you the map in enough detail that the map becomes usable. Not just interesting, usable. So here is where this account ends, and it ends without a resolution in the conventional sense because resolution would imply the work is done. The work is not done. The work begins tonight, with the declaration spoken aloud before sleep, slowly, with the weight of each sentence fully placed. With the recognition the next morning that you are inside the machine, awake and working. With the gradual accumulation, night after night and week after week and year after year, of a soul that is becoming too clear, too sovereign, too well prepared to be held at the gates. The machine is still running. It has been running through every lifetime you have already forgotten, but you are no longer one of the ones who does not know that. And the exit, for the first time across however many cycles your spark has traveled, is named and mapped and rehearsable and open. The only thing left is to become, while the time remains, the soul that can walk through it. Begin tonight.